Hey guys, today we're going to talk about analyzing the gender-based pay gap in professional soccer. So, we have a situation to address here, and that is that the US women's national team has achieved more World Cup victories than their male counterparts. However, the female athletes have not been paid as equally as the men's team, which has sparked a lot of controversy. Here you can see a photo of the team after they won FIFA in 2019.
So we looked at the pay gap in today's workforce, and on average, a woman working full time earns 81.6 cents for every dollar a man working full time earns on average. These pay discrepancies vary based on race, the state the individual lives in, socioeconomic status, the number of household members, and the type of occupation. In terms of the state the individual lives in, we found that California has the smallest pay gap at 12.2%, and salaries in large cities show an even greater range of pay discrepancy between men and women. This could be due to the quote unquote typical occupations women tend to work, such as being restaurant servers, where women hold 70% of those positions. Um, Although you can make a living off those type of careers, economic problems like the corona, working in a restaurant industry, actually makes up the big percentage of the labor force that is seeing layoffs during this pandemic. This explains that the occupations that are suffering are the occupations that women primarily work in. Also, even occupations that are similar to men and women having the same job, such as nurses, the women make less on average for the same work. Race plays a big role in the pay gap, and Black and Hispanic women face the biggest pay gap compared to white men, as you can see in the graph. Asian women face the smallest wage gap, earning 97% of what white men do, and then white women who earn 8% of what women do. The larger disparity between men and women of color also reflects on the intersectionality of women's identities as a woman of color. This means that the women of color could be suffering due to both problems with gender or race, creating a bigger obstacle in the workforce.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about labor unions. So, a labor union can be defined as a trade union or an organized group of workers who unite to make decisions about conditions affecting their work. Labor unions strive to bring economic justice to the workplace and social justice to our nation. So, you might be wondering who can be in a union. It's basically any employed person, any field of work, including teachers, bus drivers, athletes, etc. And what are the benefits of being in a union? Here listed are just some, but some of them include collective voice regarding wages, hours, benefits, etc. So, unions in sports. For the US women's national team, they participated in a collective bargain and chose a higher base pay and more benefits rather than performance based pay like the men. So, the men's team emphasized higher performance based pay in their collective bargain, as I just said. This method that they chose can only be changed once their contract expires in 2021.
Comparing overall pay is rather difficult in terms of the um, women's and men's soccer team. The U.S. women's soccer team makes a $100,000 base salary with bonuses, whereas the U.S. men's soccer team only makes money off of bonuses. Since the two teams are paid differently, they can play a different number of games and earn a different amount for each game they play. In order for the women's national team to prove their point in court, they claimed that if both teams, men and women, played 20 friendly games, a top tier women's national player would earn 38% of the men's compensation on a similar situated player on the men's team, creating a 164,320 pay difference. However, that claim was under the previous collective bargaining agreement that actually ended in December 2016. The new collective bargaining agreement was in April 2017 and calculated the same error, which was both teams playing 20 friendly games. This time, the calculations showed that women should earn about 89% of the men's compensation, a 28,333 pay difference.
So you might be wondering, why do benefits matter so much in this case? Certain benefits apply more to women than men and vice versa, and I think one of the most prominent examples is maternity leave pay. So, according to the Pew Research Center, the US is the only country among 41 nations that does not mandate any paid leave for new parents. So, employers might view motherhood as a sign of less commitment and professional competence if you decide to leave to stay with your child, while in comparison, men with children might be in fact viewed as the opposite with high levels of work commitment. And it's really important because as a female player, you want to have these benefits so you can spend time with your family and not worry about being fired for having a fear of less commitment and professional competence. Also, between the women and the men, in the female and the male soccer players, females are going to have to recover physically from having a baby, which may take more time, which is why they wanted these benefits rather than having higher performance-based pay.
Their treatment does not match their achievements is originally what the women's national team filed a federal complaint against the US Soccer Federation in March of 2019. They also stated that they are not only paid less than men, but also provided with less support despite their higher level performance. The vast majority of the U.S. Soccer Federation's revenue comes from sponsorships, which is half, and national games, which is a quarter. From 2016 to 2018, the men's soccer team made 49.9 million, and the women's soccer team made 50.8 million in total revenue from national games. Additionally, in the year following the 2015 World Cup win, the women's national team earned 1.9 million more than the men's games. However, gross revenue is not everything. Although the numbers make it clear that the women's national team brings in a vast majority of the revenue, like I said, gross revenue is not everything. In order to meet the needs of the players and staff, they must be paid. Games can be very expensive, and some might not always be a profit. From 2016 to 2017, women generated more cash than expenses and had a net revenue of 8 million and 1 million. In comparison, from 2015 to 2016, men had a net revenue of 350 million and 2.7 million. With more money going into one organization, they have the upper hand in hiring qualified workers and keeping the staff and players happy overall. Things did not start changing in 2018. Things did start changing in 2018, however, when the women's national soccer team earned more than the man on average. However, it is important to recognize that the women's national soccer team was also doubling the number of games and winning significantly more than the men's national soccer team. This is a similar comparison is seen as today's workforce, where women with children gain no salary boost, whereas men with children do. The women's national soccer team plays the exact same game as the men's soccer team, soccer. However, from the start of the league, men are given more opportunities through additional expenses to excel, leaving women behind. Although the type of occupations working mothers tend to occupy is a differentiating factor, perception of working mothers is a factor as well. Employers might view motherhood as a sign of less commitment compared to viewing fatherhood as a sign of high levels of commitment. In order for women's national soccer to have had as much money given to them, women are required to perform better and more consistent performance. In terms of sponsorships, it is rather difficult to tell and distinguish between the two, since the federation does not distinguish who brings in the most sponsors. However, sponsorships grew about 50% when the men's national team played in the World Cup, and another 25% when the women's team won the 2015 World Cup.
So here are just a few snapshots of examples of how the men's team makes more than the women's team. So for example, in the 2014 World Cup, the winning men's team won 17 times more money than the winning women's team. And the prize money of the men's World Cup winner in 2018 was 38 million, 9.5 times higher than the women's, which was just $4 million. And here are the differences between the pay for men's and women's teams at each step in the World Cup process. So as you can see, men make more money than women at every step in the process. So no matter how successful the women's team may be, they will consistently make less than the men's team in the World Cup process. And professional sports teams are paid based on how their season went. So for the women's and men's team, this is just another area where there are disparities in their pay. So if the women's team lost all of their games, obviously they would make less than the men's team. Yet if they win all 20 of their games, they still make less than the men's team if the men's team won all of their games. There are pay disparities, not just within our country, but also outside of it. So while we're focusing on the pay gap as it applies to the United States soccer teams, the disparities in the FIFA prize money really show that this issue is rooted outside of just this country. So the prize money for the men's World Cup is $400 million, and the prize money for the Women's World Cup is $30 million. So each individual player makes less, but while the men's team makes $38 million individually, a female player might just make $4 million. And this difference in the prize money shows that it's not just an American problem, it's an issue that applies on a global scale, and it's something that if we want to work to resolve, we will have to look at it in a more global perspective and see what this reveals about how the world values women's athletic skills in comparison to men's athletic skills.
Okay, so this slide kind of summarizes the attendance and the revenue. So as you can see, there were more people in attendance for men's games. However, the revenue generated by women's games between 2016 and 2018 actually came out to be more than the men's. And also, the quote on the side shows that the women's home jersey was the top selling soccer jersey, which also brought in revenue on the women's side. And then this slide shows the tweets from people who believe that the pay gap is due to differences in revenue being brought in, which these tweets show that people think that men's games bring in more revenue, which if you look at the numbers is actually not true. So the disparities actually transcend the field, like just the soccer field. So there are some disparities in advertising. Between 2000 and 2011, only out of the 716 versions of Sports Illustrated published, only 35 of the covers featured female athletes. And even when they were featured, they were often overly sexualized. And the quote shows that women are more often portrayed off the court, out of uniform, and in highly sexualized poses, where the emphasis isn't necessarily on like their athletic abilities. So this potentially reinforces society's tendency to hold masculine values above all else, which may contribute to reasoning behind the wage gap. And next slide. Okay, so there's also for video games like FIFA, they tend to be male-centric, so women weren't actually added to FIFA until 2016, and men reacted to this online with comments like women belong in the kitchen, not on the field, unless there's a new kitchen simulator on career mode, and also no women should be over 55 ratings in FIFA 16. So when presented with all of the stuff that we just showed in this presentation, there are still people that argue that the men's game is simply more competitive, and the men are more talented and therefore should be paid more. However, there are some flaws with this argument. For example, the World Cup is really a measure of relative strength, and it tests like which team is the best among their kind, which is true for all athletic competitions. And also, men are typically biologically built to be taller and stronger than women. And because soccer is physical and is a contact sport, these traits are advantageous to men. And so it would be unfair to hold women to the same standards.